Ever wonder what's really fueling your child's meltdowns? Well, let's uncover 10 brain based reasons why. Hi, I'm Dr. Roseann, and kids have meltdowns. But have you ever really thought about what's happening in their nervous system and their brain and why these meltdowns are occurring? Well, we're going to talk about 10 of the most common reasons why kids melt down. And it's not always because they have a clinical issue. So, even though clinical issues like anxiety, depression, or wired uniquely brains, kids with learning disabilities or autism or ADHD, dyslexia, there might be more prone to meltdowns. Everybody's unique. It doesn't mean that's the reason. And, let's dive into those 10 reasons. So the first one you may have heard of, but you may not understand. So sensory overload. Kids get a lot throughout the day, right? In the last episode, we talked about, some of the reasons why kids struggle. And I've been talking more and more about the nervous system. But at school, they're faced with smells, sounds, large crowds. I used to work in this giant high school that when the original part of the high school, right, had normal size hallways. And when that bell rang, it was scary. And the kids would just try to get through these regular sized doors to these other parts of this giant, giant high school. Um, they couldn't expand it. It was kind of insane. And I remember, like, I'm pretty chill most of the time. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, the bell's gonna ring. And I would run because I didn't want to get caught in that because it was weird. It was like a scary kind of feeling. And so if you're that kid in that hallway and you are a kid who's already on the edge, that little bit can lead to a lot of dysregulation, right? And even, don't forget sensory, right? It's, you're having difficulty modulating normal sensory information, touch, sound, taste, all of these components. Your body has a hard time managing it. You might be like, I don't know what you're talking about because it's a benign thing for you because your nervous system, your sensory system are operating correctly. So it's able to modulate, take in the information and still do their job. But for your child, those sensory components may be causing meltdowns, maybe at school, maybe at home, maybe socially, maybe all over, right? And it really has a lot to do with their skill level, what their assets are, how much they can mask, what's the environment like, right? Meltdowns occur for different reasons. And as you know, your kid's not doing this on purpose because in the last episode, we talked about why kids act differently at school than at home, right? So the next reason is emotional overload. So some kids feel things really strongly, and people with the astrological sign of Cancer feel really strongly. So if you're feeling things really strongly, that means you're having big emotions throughout the day. And if you can't just bypass things and you're just feeling and feeling and feeling, then it's got to come out in some way. And sometimes it comes out in these behavioral outbursts. And, I think what's interesting to know about, kids that with dysregulated nervous system, sometimes it's immediate that you see that they had an emotional, response to something. And then that just happened and you're making a clear connection. But with any of these things, it could be hours, the day before. These things don't always have an immediate connection. I hope that's a real aha moment for you. When I would observe kids at school, I would be shocked sometimes how long it would take for their nervous system to react to something that had happened hours before, even a couple of days before, right? It really depends on what that individual has. So the third thing is cognitive overload. I see this a lot with kids with ADHD, learning and processing problem. It's you are working so hard, right? And even the most regulated kids behaviorally and emotionally get taxed. and basically your cup gets full, the one last drop, you thought you finished all your homework, and then you realize you still had one more thing, and it leads to a major meltdown, right? That can make sense to you, right? But if you're working at max capacity all the time, and it's really hard to tell sometimes. Recently, somebody had told me that, their child's friend had revealed that they're a 12th grader in a private school, a really good private school, and had can't read, like, basically can't read, and has been masking for 12, 13 school years, and she was in shock because she's a teacher. And I was like, this occurs all the time because this is a really smart, regulated kid. And he's holding it together. And he was, telling her, and it was pretty emotional, the moment of revealing this. And if you are in cognitive overload, you are can have be prone to more reactions. Okay. The next few things are logical, but we ignore them. So physical fatigue, right? So some kids, particularly my pandas kids, kids with anxiety or OCD, there's a physical side to those things, right? So obviously, logically, pans and pandas, we have medical infections, we have things. But anxiety, depression, it is tiring. That is one of the biggest things of kids and adults will tell me when they come to me, that they're just exhausted because your nervous system is in an overactive fight or flight or freeze state all the time. And so if you're exhausted, you face a challenge, what's going to happen? Probably not going to face it well. So we are much more likely to see a meltdown and a big emotional response or a shutdown during those times, right? These are the same kids that refuse school and things like that too. Hunger and thirst. So restrictive eating, clinical issues like ARFID, these are real. They happen, picky eating isn't just about being picky. It often has something behind it. It could be sensory. And so if you're not getting enough nutrients, you're not getting enough water, I don't talk enough about actually hydration, you are much more likely to have emotional reactions, to withdraw, to do these things. Meltdowns are much more likely to occur. Transitions. So I talked a lot in the previous episodes about transitions from school to home, but transitions in general can be incredibly stressful, especially when you have a kid, right, where they have an attention issue or a learning problem, or they're struggling with emotions because they need more time to move from activity to activity, and each one becomes very stressful. And so we have to think about that. How do we prepare kids for transition? How do we maybe reduce transitions? What can we do to support them so it's not so stressful? And then stress and anxiety is a big reason, right? So we have a stressed nervous system. We have a child with anxiety. We have anticipatory anxiety. These are factors that kids lead to more explosive behavior. Kids often get mislabeled as being oppositional defiant or a mood disorder or ADD, when in fact, one of the biggest drivers of meltdowns I see in 3 decades with thousands of kids is anxiety. And it can lead to those other things, no doubt, right? For sure. But anxiety and that internal worry, it's an invisible disability. We don't always see that it's driving things, but the meltdowns are a clue, and then we have to work backwards, right? Lack of communication skills is my number 8 reason why meltdowns happen. So kids get frustrated. It's not just the little kid, right? It's not just your little toddler. Like, we knew they would get mad because we didn't understand them, but teenagers, right? So kids can do well in school, but have a low EQ and don't have the skills. They don't know how to communicate when they're frustrated. So their go to response is a meltdown. When kids and individuals have a coping mechanism, healthy or not, they're much more likely to repeat it over and over. And so poor communication is a big part of it because they just don't know what to say. They don't have the right words, and that means they don't have the right tools. Number 9, unfamiliar or unpredictable events can be a major trigger of meltdown, particularly for my wired uniquely brains that really crave predictability and routine. Anxious individuals in general have that anticipatory anxiety. And so you can hear little clues about this. These are kids that might ask repeated questions, might express, I don't want to go to that, may express some fears. And so a lot of times you might want to say, what does that look like where we're going? You're going to be taking this entrance exam. What do you think the test is like? Those kind of things. Get them to activate their visual components, and that will help them see themselves there. What do you see when you're there? Those kind of things. These are questions that happen over time. And if you're in my dysregulation solution, I have the scripts, I have the how to's and role plays exactly how to do this. You can go to drroseann.com/help. I created dozens of how to's and scripts because people need this. And you don't want to just go to some health coach. You want to go to somebody who's worked with thousands of people and who's a mom too. And I've done this. Okay. Lastly, number 10, tech overwhelm. So, man, I felt tech overwhelmed yesterday. Like, I'm working on my book, Dysregulated Kids. I'm 27,000 words in. And it's just a lot. I'm writing every minute in front of this big computer. Then I had meetings all day. I had a Pinterest consultation about our Pinterest account. And I literally was like, I am done. Whatever time it was like 6:30. I'd been done 2 hours before, but I had to finish something. And so if you're wired differently and your nervous system's already struggling with understimulation or overstimulation, and that tech is like sucks the life out of you. Don't get me wrong, I love me my tech, but we need tech free time, and it can be a major contributor. The overuse of it, but also the transition off of it. I find that the lack of boundaries, and the improper transitions is huge. I know I told you stories working from this family from a faraway state, as always. And their biggest complaint was actually how do they, deal with transitioning him. And he's a kid on the spectrum, super, super smart, so cute. And he's older, and it was meltdown city every time they try to transition. And they had a really terrible protocol that as soon as he got in the car, he got his iPad, right? Why? Because we don't want him to have a meltdown. And in fact, all it did was lead to longer and bigger meltdowns. And so we worked on that. We worked on regulating his nervous system, not happening at all. So that was huge. They had been like, that was their main problem for like years. And they didn't know how to get unstuck from it. And so I told them how to, and we role played it. That's what's in our dysregulation solution, which is amazing. So with all of this, I'm going to tell you what you got to do. You got to co-regulate, because it's going to either help you if you're co-regulating, or if you're dysregulating as a parent, you're putting fuel on the fire. And there are lots of things you can do. Make sure you go back and listen to that episode. But I hope you got to think differently about what is happening in your child's brain. And we talked about 10 of the most common things that I see that we're just not talking about. So I hope this was insightful. Definitely, please tell me how this is impacting you, whether you're watching on YouTube and you're leaving a comment, or you're listening. Please leave a review. It makes a huge difference. And just know that you got this.